The room felt tight that night in Chicago, with a small recorder sitting on the table, while both brothers paced around quietly, checking buzzing phones and watching messages roll in slowly, including one saying their father was missing somewhere in Mexico, which left the air feeling heavier than usual because nobody understood what really happened, and nobody felt brave enough to say anything out loud, so the only thing moving in that room was fear settling in slow, while the brothers tried to act calm. And that moment right there is where their whole story circles back eventually. But to understand why it mattered, you have to know where everything started long before the trouble came. Little Village in the 1990s moved different, with long blocks full of tight apartments and crowded stores sitting under the rumble of the Pink Line trains that passed overhead slowly. And kids growing up there heard drug deals happening like background traffic because the economy around them created a world where hustle mattered more than anything teachers said. The neighborhood sat near major highways that let product move east or west quickly, and that gave traffickers a setup that felt ready-made for distribution, which shaped the streets long before the twins were old enough to understand the rules. People in Little Village treated police cruisers like passing clouds because nobody expected real protection from anything, and the kids noticed everything even when they pretended not to watch the older dudes moving cash around quietly near the alleys behind 26th Street. The twins grew up in that environment with the noise of the city teaching them lessons faster than school ever did. And when you live in a place built like a corridor for drugs, you inhale the culture without meaning to, and you learn the difference between street-level chaos and structured business. Chicago's grid made it easy for shipments to come in from the southwest border before heading toward places like Detroit or Cincinnati. And the twins saw how the flow passed through the neighborhood like a quiet river carrying money and danger together. Their house sat near people who worked legit jobs and people who handled illegal product. And the only difference a child could see was who came home stressed and who came home in silence. Their father carried silence better than most people because Margarito Flores Sr. already lived a full life inside the heroin trade before the twins were even born, and his early cases from the mid-80s sat on his record like heavy stamps that kept following him around. He caught an 11-kilogram heroin case in the early 1980s, and prison introduced him to members of the Latin Kings who respected his business mindset even though he refused to join their gang culture fully. He never wanted tattoos or flashy clothes because he believed business should look clean if you wanted to survive, and he pushed that idea onto his son slowly. When he came home from prison, he treated smuggling like a trade school lesson, taking the twins on early trips to Mexico, where they learned to navigate mountain roads and talk respectfully with farmers who grew marijuana in remote areas. By 7, they knew how to hide product in a gas tank without leaving a trace, and by 12, they already packaged weed, heroin, and cocaine as if it were regular house chores. Violence never impressed their father because he believed bullets created police attention, and police attention brought risk. So he kept his family disciplined and focused on learning systems instead of chaos. Crime became familiar to the twins in a way that felt normal to them because the household talked about drugs the same way other families talked about carpentry or trucking, and the lack of gunplay inside their father's operation gave them the belief that business done right stayed safer than gang life. Early Mexico trips showed them how product moved from mountains to cities carefully, and they watched their father negotiate calmly with men who carried weapons but preferred polite conversations over unnecessary force. Their older brother Armando learned those lessons earlier, but he shaped them in a different direction since he moved heavier in the Latin Kings and ran his own network around stash houses and local crews. He didn't want the twins joining the gang because he knew the violence came fast for younger soldiers, so he kept them close as helpers rather than members, letting them handle storage spots and observe how deals work behind the scenes. He used them to move small amounts under supervision, and they learned how to gauge trust from older buyers who didn't like sloppy behavior. Armando had his faults, but he understood the business better than most street guys because he built structured routes instead of surviving day to day. Working with Armando showed the twins that organization mattered more than street reputation, and they saw that gang members often got trapped in unnecessary fights that stalled the money flow, while logistics managers stayed in the shadows stacking profits. They learned how to package neatly, how to manage a stash location properly, and how to rotate safe houses to avoid patterns. And those small wins gave them confidence long before adulthood came. By the time they approached 17, they already understood supply lines, trusted contacts, and the value of keeping their names quiet, which set the stage for what came next when their skills grew sharper than anyone expected. At 17, the twins hit their first major deal when they brokered a 30-kilogram cocaine purchase without involving their father, which signaled a turning point because it showed suppliers that these kids understood scale and reliability early. The shift from simple helpers to young managers happened naturally because they already knew how to move product faster than many older distributors who depended on street enforcers instead of efficient networks. They had a strong advantage because they were bilingual and could speak comfortably with both Mexican suppliers and American buyers, creating trust on both sides of the border without needing middlemen to translate anything. Their approach built relationships quickly because suppliers liked their clean style and buyers liked their punctuality. So the twins created a small reputation based on consistency rather than aggression. They didn't dress like flashy gang members, and that helped them blend into normal settings where large deals could happen quietly without drawing suspicion. Every move they made during those early years taught them how to build a long chain rather than short gains, and their customer list expanded faster than anyone predicted for teenagers. As money started flowing quietly, the twins invested in infrastructure instead of clothes or parties, and they began renting warehouses near rail yards and major interstates that allowed shipments to enter Chicago unnoticed. The location seemed innocent on the outside, but inside, they built efficient setups where product could be offloaded fast and moved out before anyone asked questions. They kept things organized with color-coded burner phones, so workers always knew which line connected to which contact, and losing a phone never risked exposing the entire network. They enforced strict rules in their operation by banning guns anywhere near shipments, because weapons attracted paranoia, and paranoia created mistakes that cost money. They preferred hiring childhood friends with clean records who needed money but didn't crave street validation, and that removed the drama that came with gang-affiliated workers. Their warehouses operated like small delivery hubs, where product moved from trucks to cars with the same precision that fast food restaurants use for orders. The twins treated their business like a delivery chain, where speed and accuracy mattered more than intimidation, and that thinking positioned them above traditional street crews who relied on fear instead of process. Their warehouses used timers, coded instructions, and rotating crews who handled loading and unloading like a factory team. And the efficiency of their system impressed suppliers who cared more about reliability than personality. Their logistics evolved into a machine that kept growing because they mastered every transportation method available, moving product through trucks, trains, and produce shipments that hid cocaine under crates of fruits or vegetables. They pushed cash north and south by car, storing it in hidden compartments or vacuum-sealed packages before sending it back toward the border discreetly. Mexico runs became routine as they traveled back and forth to negotiate directly with cartel leaders who respected sharp business instincts when they saw them. The twins built a strong network of mentors, runners, accountants, and transport specialists who followed instructions carefully because the entire operation relied on discipline and trust. Keeping violence low allowed them to avoid federal attention because authorities often noticed violent crews before they noticed organized distributors, and that kept the business stable for long periods. Their quiet style created an environment where money moved smoothly and workers stayed loyal without fear of unnecessary danger, which made their network stronger than most traditional trafficking crews across Chicago. Their system kept evolving because they cared about details that other traffickers ignored, and their ability to stay invisible came from understanding logistics deeper than anyone their age. Those early moves built the foundation for the empire that later transported 60 tons of cocaine and connected them directly to some of the most dangerous cartel bosses alive. But none of that would have happened if these early years hadn't sharpened their instincts carefully. The twins kept growing their business until Mexico noticed them properly, and everything shifted once their father's old connections resurfaced and pulled them deeper into a world much heavier than Chicago streets ever showed them. Margarito Flores Sr. had roots stretching into Sinaloa territory through relationships built during the mid-80s and early 1990s, and those ties carried weight because men in the mountains respected consistency more than flashy behavior. Those connections reached networks linked to the Sinaloa Federation and the Beltran-Leyva organization, and those groups controlled large trafficking corridors during that period while operating across states like Sinaloa, Durango, and Chihuahua. The twins grew up hearing those names whispered carefully, and now those same people were ready to see if the brothers could handle bigger responsibilities. Their first real introductions happened in the mountains of Sinaloa during the early 2000s, when shipments began moving from Mexican producers toward their Chicago pipeline in heavier amounts. The early shipments were small enough to test reliability, but large enough to mark a step forward because moving 50 or 100 kilograms showed potential to people who analyzed behavior carefully. The father served as the bridge during those early meetings, guiding the twins through conversations with men who represented powerful families like the Beltran-Leyva brothers and the larger Sinaloa network. These introductions took place near rural hideouts, where dirt roads wound through steep hills, and the twins watched how deals were handled without unnecessary pressure because money spoke clearly in those settings. Their first big-scale orders came after those trial runs proved successful because suppliers liked how fast the twins moved product without losing shipments or creating drama. Chicago served as a perfect distribution hub, and the traffickers valued that advantage highly since they needed trusted people who controlled strong routes into the Midwest region. Those moments in the mountains helped the twins understand the seriousness of the business because the people they met controlled hundreds of thousands of kilograms and commanded loyalty across Mexico. The air felt heavy in those remote places, but the deals went smoothly because reliability carried tremendous power in those circles. El Mayo Zambada became the most influential figure in their early growth because he carried himself with unusual calm that stood out in that violent world. He operated with a business-like approach that appealed to the twins immediately, and he assessed people using patience instead of intimidation. El Mayo listened when the twins spoke, and he appreciated the way they handled logistics without relying on fear or sloppy tactics, which earned them quiet respect within the Sinaloa structure. He liked their discipline and praised their efficiency openly, telling associates that these brothers moved product cleanly without acting reckless or childish. People trusted El Mayo's judgment because he rarely rushed decisions, and his approval made the twins valuable to networks seeking reliable distributors who could handle multi-ton loads without mistakes. His trust grew because their deliveries never came up short, and their payments arrived quickly in Mexico without delays or excuses. El Mayo saw their strengths clearly and valued their ability to keep violence away from business, and that made them different from typical traffickers who blended ego with bad decisions. The twins felt comfortable around him, and he allowed them into rooms that many young American traffickers never reached. Understanding the players inside the Sinaloa Federation became a necessary skill once the twins became known, and they studied how the internal structure worked to keep themselves safe. The Sinaloa Federation operated with multiple factions, led by strong figures like Ismael Zambada Garcia, known as El Mayo, Joaquin Guzman Loera, known as El Chapo, and the Beltran Leyva brothers, led by Arturo Beltran Leyva. These groups worked together during the early 2000s while controlling vast routes through cities like Culiacan, Mazatlan, and Guadalajara, although tensions existed quietly beneath the surface due to shifting alliances and personal ambitions. El Mayo led with patience and strategy, preferring steady money over unnecessary attention, and he enjoyed stability that came from keeping violence controlled. El Chapo moved differently, using ambition and risk to expand territories rapidly, and he brought intense energy to every decision he made. Arturo Beltran Leyva maintained a harder edge rooted in reputation and retribution, and he made decisions using forceful pressure that commanded fear across multiple states. These leaders shaped the landscape around the twins, and learning their styles kept the brothers from stepping into traps that caught less aware traffickers. The twins avoided choosing sides early because choosing sides too soon during peaceful years created dangerous commitments that limited flexibility, and they wanted to keep every door open as long as possible. Their father taught them that neutrality protected longevity, and their early success came from serving multiple factions without becoming tied too tightly to any single leader. They handled shipments for the unified structure without involving themselves in internal issues, and that kept them attractive to every branch of the organization that needed strong distribution in the United States. Their approach reflected discipline because they agreed to nothing without assessing long-term consequences, and that mindset kept them safe in a world shaped by shifting alliances. Their meetings in the mountains taught them that the drug world rewarded people who controlled their emotions and respected the hierarchy without trying to act bigger than their role. The twins watched experienced traffickers navigate those dynamics carefully, and those lessons shaped how they positioned themselves inside an empire that controlled massive cocaine flows across continents. Pedro's problems started during the early 2000s when he traveled into Mexico for business connected to Sinaloa suppliers who trusted the twins enough to let them negotiate prices directly. He was grabbed by a faction tied to Arturo Beltran Leyva after a dispute involving a debt connected to one of their intermediaries who mishandled money and created suspicion around Chicago deliveries. The men who took him moved with military-style discipline and kept him inside a small room that smelled like dirt and chemicals, with barely any food or sunlight reaching him. He slept on rough blankets while guards carried rifles and stared silently, which made the situation feel colder than anything he ever experienced in Chicago. Communication between Pedro and his brother collapsed instantly because the captors controlled every message and refused to let him speak freely. Workers in Chicago noticed something felt wrong when calls stopped and deliveries stalled without warning, and rumors started forming quickly. The kidnapping changed the twins completely because fear settled into their minds at a level they never felt before, and the stakes no longer felt like business problems. Pedro realized how vulnerable a trafficker became once he left his territory, and he understood that loyalty in Mexico depended heavily on money and power rather than words or intentions. Margarito felt the pressure harder because he remained responsible for protecting his brother's life and navigating dangerous conversations with people far above their usual circle. The brothers understood that survival required smarter moves than anything they planned previously, and the kidnapping showed them exactly how high the ladder climbed within Sinaloa hierarchy. Margarito traveled into cartel territory to negotiate Pedro's release with the help of contacts who respected the family enough to arrange a meeting deeper in the Sinaloa mountains. He rode through long roads surrounded by farmlands and checkpoints controlled by armed men who watched every movement with cold eyes that revealed nothing. The meeting place was a palapa constructed from wooden beams and palm leaves, sitting on a ridge overlooking open fields where guards stood positioned carefully. Inside that palapa, he faced Joaquin Guzman Loera, known everywhere as El Chapo, who held enormous influence across the organization. The tone inside the room felt tense, but strangely calm, because El Chapo studied every detail quietly before deciding how he wanted to proceed. Margarito explained the situation and defended his brother with steady words, while El Chapo listened carefully without raising his voice. El Chapo understood that the debt causing the conflict resulted from a mistake by someone connected to his own circle, and he let Pedro go after confirming the truth behind the issue. He allowed the brothers to handle the payment later because he valued distributors who admitted mistakes without creating unnecessary conflict. This decision locked the twins deeper into Sinaloa politics because it created a personal understanding between them and a powerful leader who expected loyalty in return. The meeting made it clear that their path now involved bigger players who paid attention to their actions closely. Pedro returned to Chicago with a calmer mind, but a heavier awareness of the responsibilities attached to their new standing within the organization. People in Chicago viewed the twins differently after the kidnapping because surviving an ordeal inside Sinaloa territory gave them quiet respect across trafficking circles. The kidnapping revealed their importance to the cartel because leaders would not negotiate for unimportant distributors who lacked value or reliability. Their suppliers offered better credit terms after the incident because they recognized the twins as dependable partners willing to maintain discipline under pressure. Larger shipments began moving through Chicago soon after their return because cartel leaders understood that the twins could handle scale without attracting unnecessary attention. The numbers increased from hundreds of kilograms to consistent multi-ton shipments that required advanced planning and deeper coordination on both sides of the border. The twins now handled product coming from groups led by El Mayo and occasionally from others connected to the Beltran Leyva faction when alliances remained stable. Those shipments brought higher expectations because failing at that level meant disappointing men who controlled entire states and commanded armies of workers. Pressure built quietly because the twins now operated inside a structure that demanded constant success and rapid decision-making, and any mistake risked drawing dangerous attention. Every shipment required precise organization, every dollar needed proper movement, and every call needed correct timing. Their father noticed the increased weight on their shoulders, and he warned them repeatedly about the dangers attached to relationships forming at such high levels. The twins understood that their world had changed permanently after the kidnapping, and although they gained status, they also carried responsibilities that demanded sharper instincts and more controlled emotions. Their return to Chicago marked the beginning of a new era for their operation because they now stood positioned between two worlds that shaped their identity and survival. The kidnapping pulled them closer to Sinaloa leaders while raising their profile across the Midwest trafficking network. They entered a phase where money increased rapidly and expectations tightened sharply. They strengthened their business and deepened their ties with the senior cartel figures who appreciated their discipline. The kidnapping served as the moment everything became real, and the brothers continued building their empire with a new understanding of exactly how dangerous their world truly was. The twins entered their strongest run between 2004 and 2008, when their entire operation turned into a full logistics engine that moved product with a level of precision rarely seen in trafficking circles. They handled between 1,500 and 2,000 kilograms every month during those years, and those numbers stayed steady because both brothers treated every shipment like a corporate task instead of a street hustle. Their network spread across major American cities, including Chicago, Cincinnati, Columbus, Detroit, Philadelphia, New York, and Washington, D.C., and every route moved with consistency that impressed their suppliers deeply. Chicago became known as the Little Sinaloa hub during that period because so much product moved through the city quietly without major violence, and people in law enforcement circles recognized the region as a key trafficking corridor shaped heavily by Sinaloa influence. Their efficiency created a situation where product entered Chicago and left Chicago with smooth timing that matched professional freight operations. They operated from multiple stash houses spread across neighborhoods near major highways and rail yards, and these locations made it easy to receive loads coming from the southwest border or from discrete transport routes arranged through Mexican handlers. Drivers carrying shipments reported to specific houses where workers offloaded product rapidly and prepared new routes for distribution. Those monthly numbers reflected an operation larger than many street crews combined, and every successful month increased the weight on their shoulders quietly because expectations kept rising across the organization. Money moved through their business like a river with constant flow that never seemed to slow down, and investigators later estimated that their network cycled between $1.8 and $2 billion during their peak years. Cash arrived in bulk, and workers vacuumed, sealed it into tight packets that fit easily into compartments inside vehicles or beneath floorboards in various homes. The twins used hidden spaces under porches, behind walls and inside furniture to store and organize the money until couriers transported it toward the border. Some couriers carried millions stuffed inside couches, shipped toward Los Angeles, and others transported tightly packed bundles inside car panels modified specifically for smuggling. Armando buried money near his house in Texas and used small transactions to move funds quietly without raising suspicions at banks. Couriers lived double lives because most of them looked like regular working people who handled normal jobs during the daytime while transporting large sums at night. These workers avoided tattoos, gang markings, or suspicious clothing, and their clean appearance kept authorities from noticing their movements. Many of them traveled long distances without drawing any attention, and their calm behavior helped the twins avoid unnecessary risk. The money they handled represented the size of the empire that formed around the twins, and every courier understood that mistakes brought serious consequences if shipments went missing or arrived late. Their invisibility came from careful discipline because the twins refused to involve themselves in flashy violence or chaotic street behavior that attracted federal attention. They avoided public beefs with local gangs and refused to let workers carry guns around shipments. Their operation survived because it stayed boring from an outside view, and boring trafficking organizations often last longer than reckless ones. They never executed wild killings or staged dramatic attacks because they cared about stability more than reputation, and that mindset created a low profile that protected them for years. This invisibility made them dangerous to law enforcement because loud traffickers create paperwork while quiet traffickers build empires. Their lack of violence did not come from fear but from strategy because violence created investigations, and investigations created problems that cut into profits. Their business model relied on timing and anonymity, and those goals required a clean environment that lacked dramatic confrontations. Many cartel groups used violence as a tool for dominance, but the twins operated thousands of miles away from Mexico and did not need that kind of presence in Chicago. Their distribution network relied on trust from both suppliers and clients, and trust remained stronger when workers felt safe operating without constant threats. While their Chicago operation ran smoothly, their lives in Mexico reflected quiet luxury, funded by consistent profits. They purchased houses in places like Guadalajara, where large compounds held expensive cars, trained horses, and occasionally exotic animals that caught the attention of visitors. Their homes featured spacious rooms and manicured lawns, surrounded by high walls that offered privacy from curious neighbors. These houses became safe gathering spots for family events and meetings with high-level contacts who preferred environments away from danger. They moved comfortably through wealthy neighborhoods where nobody suspected their involvement in transnational trafficking because they dressed casually and acted like regular businessmen. Their wives enjoyed suburban lifestyles that carried no visible connection to the dangerous world their husbands operated in, and they handled regular tasks like school activities, grocery trips, and family outings while hiding the reality of their income. Their homes included expensive furniture, polished floors, and modern electronics that came from profits circulating through the cartel supply chain. They traveled to American cities for shopping or vacations and lived quietly while balancing routine schedules for their children. Their public lives looked normal enough that neighbors rarely questioned anything, and that illusion of stability helped keep tensions low within their families. Parties inside their Mexico homes included music, catered food, and guests from various parts of the trafficking world who appreciated comfortable spaces after stressful days. Ranchera music played during gatherings, while people drank and talked openly away from law enforcement pressure. Horses performed for entertainment, and visitors enjoyed the atmosphere created by successful operations functioning behind the scenes. These parties reflected both wealth and temporary peace in an environment shaped heavily by constant danger. The twins maintained separate worlds that rarely collided because Chicago stayed strictly business, while Mexico offered relaxation and comfort for their families. They balanced these two lifestyles carefully, and that balance created a sense of control that masked the risk building around them. Their empire grew steadily with each successful shipment, and the calm surface of their operation created confidence among suppliers who now trusted them with increasingly larger quantities. Everything they built came from patience, discipline, and a strong understanding of logistics that surpassed many older traffickers who relied on intimidation instead of planning. The empire that moved 60 tons developed slowly but steadily until their name carried weight on both sides of the border. They enjoyed comfort, success, and respect from powerful figures, yet they also stood on top of a structure that could collapse instantly if any part failed. The trouble hit hard in 2008 when Edgar Guzman Lopez got killed outside a shopping center in Culiacan, and that shooting shook the entire Sinaloa structure in a way the twins never expected. Edgar was El Chapo's son, and his death changed everything because the Beltran-Leyva group blamed El Chapo for cooperating with authorities shortly before the incident. That accusation created tension instantly, and the peace that once held the Federation together started breaking apart fast across Sinaloa territory. Gunmen moved non-stop through cities like Culiacan and Mazatlan, while bodies dropped in the streets as retaliation started piling up quickly. Old alliances between powerful leaders like El Mayo and Arturo Beltran-Leyva started cracking during that period, and the violence reached levels that forced everyone in the supply chain to react carefully. The murders created chaos across multiple states because hit squads targeted police officers, rival crews, and government officials connected to either side of the situation. Edgar's death triggered attacks that spiraled uncontrollably, while the Beltran-Leyva faction hunted people they believed supported El Chapo or benefited from his protection. High-ranking figures found themselves choosing between groups that once operated together, and the atmosphere created fear among distributors across Mexico and the United States. Reports from that period showed escalating violence between both factions, and the streets carried a heavy tension that made normal business much harder. The Sinaloa Federation no longer moved with the same unity, and every decision carried new risks for anyone connected to their supply chain. The Flores twins got caught in that crossfire because they handled shipments for leaders connected to both sides before the conflict erupted fully. Their lines fed product from networks tied to El Mayo while also handling loads connected to the Beltran-Leyva brothers, and that dual connection placed them in a dangerous position. Both factions expected loyalty during the conflict, and the twins started receiving pressure from people who wanted them to declare allegiance quickly. Remaining neutral became dangerous because powerful families read neutrality as disrespect, and disrespect created consequences that nobody wanted to face. Suppliers on one side questioned their communication, and suppliers on the other side demanded confirmation that Chicago remained committed to their branch. The risks of neutrality increased weekly because shipments expected from Mexico arrived with tension attached, and phone calls came with harder tones than before. The twins saw that violence around Sinaloa was not slowing down, and they understood that any wrong move could place their entire Chicago network in danger. The situation became heavier because both wives were pregnant during this period, and that changed the emotional weight behind every conversation. The twins wanted stability for their families, but the cartel war created fear that followed them into every decision they made. Their homes in Mexico no longer felt comfortable because the conflict reached deeper into cartel politics, and safe houses no longer felt truly safe. The pressure pushed Margarito into a different mental space because the conflict forced him to think about survival outside the drug business completely. He described experiencing a spiritual shift during that time, and that shift came from watching violence escalate around people he respected and trusted previously. He felt something pulling him toward another direction because the war made everything feel unstable and temporary. He understood that loyalty inside cartel structures carried limits during chaotic times, and he saw how easily powerful people could fall when internal conflicts exploded. Internal fear started building inside both brothers because they knew that staying in the business longer meant gambling with their lives even more. They watched trusted intermediaries disappear, imprisoned or killed, and each disappearance reminded them that violence could reach Chicago if they made the wrong decisions. They started imagining scenarios where their names ended up on targets for either faction, and they knew that leaving the business quietly would not be simple. Their father warned them repeatedly about the danger of choosing sides too quickly, but the war forced choices that eliminated middle positions completely. Prison or death began to feel inevitable because the United States government already watched Chicago closely, and the cartel war made investigations easier since violence created new leads for authorities. The twins realized that federal agents were mapping the distribution chain, and they knew that their names sat close to the top of certain lists. The combination of cartel pressure and federal investigation created a storm that felt impossible to escape without drastic action. They reached a point where every choice carried risk, and every risk felt heavier than the last. The Civil War opened their eyes fully because they saw how fragile power became during conflict, and they understood that their operation might not survive another year under those conditions. Their instincts told them that the structure holding everything together was collapsing slowly, and they needed to make a choice before someone made that choice for them. That realization shaped everything that followed, and the pressure from the war pushed them toward decisions that would change their lives forever. The pressure created by the cartel war pushed the twins into a mindset where survival mattered more than everything they built, and that mindset shaped the moment they first reached out to the DEA voluntarily without waiting for an arrest or a confrontation. They contacted federal agents through an attorney who knew how to arrange quiet meetings where no cartel eyes could track their movements, and they made it clear that they wanted to cooperate before violence reached their families. They understood that stopping shipments immediately would expose their intentions because the cartel monitored movement patterns closely. So continuing business became necessary while planning the next steps secretly. They created a plan to record cartel bosses because they knew simple testimony would never hold the same weight as real audio, capturing leadership discussing shipments directly. The twins bought their own recording gear using money drawn from personal funds instead of business accounts, so the purchases would not raise suspicions among workers or suppliers. They hid the equipment inside everyday items and stored it in private spaces where only the brothers had access, and they practiced using it carefully before attempting anything involving cartel leadership. They delivered product normally during this period because keeping the operation moving protected their cover while they prepared to gather evidence. Their biggest fear came from the possibility of being caught during a conversation with someone like El Chapo or El Mayo, because those men did not tolerate betrayal at any level. They maintained extreme secrecy inside their circle and limited knowledge of the operation to themselves because even trusted workers could unintentionally reveal something dangerous. Walking that tightrope required calm behavior because every call with Mexico carried deadly potential, and the wrong tone or hesitation could raise suspicion instantly. The twins understood that one wrong phone call could end their lives and possibly endanger their families, so they rehearsed conversations and avoided showing any nervous energy when they spoke with cartel figures. They greeted leadership normally while hiding the quiet panic forming inside their minds each time they prepared to activate the recorder. Their voices stayed steady because acting normal became a survival skill, and they disguised fear behind casual business words that matched their usual style. They lived every day with quiet panic behind each move because the cartel monitored loyalty carefully during the Civil War, and any sign of inconsistency created risk. They continued traveling for meetings and negotiations while carrying hidden recording devices that could cost them everything if discovered. They held conversations with workers and clients while knowing that their cooperation with the DEA placed their lives on a clock that would expire quickly if exposed. They knew that federal agents needed clear evidence before making moves against powerful cartel leaders, and they understood that gathering that evidence required them to move deeper into danger than ever before. They kept working like everything stayed normal because the appearance of normal behavior protected them from suspicion, and they managed deliveries with the same precision they used during their strongest years. They avoided changing routines because sudden changes could alert Mexican handlers who always watch patterns for inconsistencies. They kept their voices calm during calls with figures like Vicente Zambada or Felipe Cabrera Sarabia because fear inside their tone could break trust instantly. They moved through Chicago and Mexico knowing that their cooperation remained unknown to everyone except the DEA and a few trusted federal contacts. Their world grew heavier each day because the betrayal they planned carried consequences that reached beyond themselves, and they knew that recording cartel bosses crossed a line rarely attempted by traffickers of their scale. The pressure never eased because danger stayed close at all times, and every successful recording created both relief and fear. They felt trapped between two forces because the DEA needed evidence to dismantle the cartel, and the cartel needed loyalty to maintain stability during the Civil War. They balanced these demands carefully while hoping that their timing remained perfect long enough to protect their families. The decision to cooperate shaped the rest of their lives because it forced them into a double existence where they handled product for the cartel while delivering information to the DEA. They understood that remaining calm would save them, and they learned to mask fear with disciplined speech and steady movements. The danger surrounding them grew with every recording, and they knew their plan could collapse instantly if one person noticed something strange in their behavior. Their minds stayed focused because losing focus created gaps that experienced traffickers noticed quickly. The twins continued delivering shipments while gathering evidence because they knew that stopping immediately would put targets on their backs, and they trusted that federal protection would eventually cover their families once evidence reached a level strong enough to trigger large indictments. They walked through stores, homes, and safe houses, carrying equipment that held secrets capable of bringing down leaders who controlled entire states in Mexico. They hid their betrayal behind calm expressions and careful words because both brothers understood that survival demanded perfect acting until the moment came to surrender themselves fully to federal agents. The tightrope they walked remained thin and dangerous, and every step forward came with uncertainty that weighed heavily on their minds. They built an empire through discipline and efficiency, and now they relied on those same skills to protect their families and escape a world that felt ready to collapse. Their plan required courage, strategy, and steady nerves, and they continued working that plan until they reached the point where their cooperation became undeniable and irreversible. The twins needed solid evidence to secure real protection, and that meant getting Joaquin Guzman Loera on tape, which sounded impossible until they created a plan involving a heroin price dispute that forced El Chapo to call directly. They told his people that the quality of a recent heroin shipment did not match the original agreement, and they pushed hard on the price because they knew disagreements made high-ranking bosses handle conversations personally. Pedro prepared the recorder quietly inside a house in Zapopan while checking the device repeatedly to make sure everything worked perfectly. Margarito paced around a bathroom with slow steps because nerves hit him hard, knowing the call could come at any moment. They kept their voices steady even though their bodies felt tense because the risks surrounding that moment stayed extremely high. When the phone finally rang, Pedro answered calmly and turned on the recorder while keeping his tone respectful. El Chapo's voice sounded relaxed but sharp, and he spoke with the confidence of a man used to controlling everything around him. His voice shifted slightly when discussing money because he liked precision, and he asked direct questions about the shipment that helped investigators later. The recording captured him greeting Pedro as amigo while discussing the heroin price dispute in clear detail, which shocked investigators because El Chapo rarely spoke so openly. Another call captured Felipe Cabrera Sarabia, known as El Ingeniero, talking about heroin quality and transportation issues while acknowledging that deliveries needed closer supervision. The twins also recorded Vicente Zambara Niebla speaking about grenades and explosives while describing possible attacks on government buildings. Investigators found those details extremely valuable because they revealed serious information about the cartel's violent capabilities and organizational structure. Federal agents studying the tapes could hear tone shifts during tense conversations, and those shifts helped them identify emotional pressure points inside the organization. The recordings offered a raw view into how senior leaders communicated during stressful periods, and the content gave prosecutors new evidence that linked multiple crimes to specific individuals. The DEA considered these recordings rare because few traffickers held access to leadership conversations involving operational decisions and violent strategies. Recording El Chapo inside Mexico pushed the risk level to the highest point because one mistake would have resulted in immediate death for both brothers. The twins remained inside cartel territory during some of these recordings, and being caught with a hidden recorder would have confirmed betrayal instantly. Armed guards nearby moved constantly around the properties, and any suspicious behavior could have resulted in violent retaliation. The twins kept the recording equipment disguised inside normal objects and hid it carefully after each call to avoid accidental discovery. They smuggled the recordings out of Mexico by hiding memory devices inside clothing and personal items before traveling into the United States. The DEA reacted with shock when they heard the first recordings because they understood how rare it was to obtain clean audio of someone as protected as El Chapo. Agents listened closely and realized that the evidence could change the direction of multiple federal cases because the tapes connected key figures to specific criminal activities. The recordings carried strategic importance because they strengthened ongoing investigations into trafficking routes, money laundering networks, and violent operations connected to the Sinaloa Federation. Agents monitored the twins carefully during this period because they understood that any breakthrough could expose the brothers to enormous danger. The impact on Sinaloa leadership became significant once investigators analyzed the recordings fully because the content revealed pressure points and internal dynamics that prosecutors could use to build strong indictments. The United States government viewed the tapes as gold because they provided first-hand evidence linking cartel leaders to drug negotiations and plans involving violence. These tapes created a domino effect that contributed to large indictments across multiple districts because they connected phone conversations to shipments moving throughout the United States. The evidence also weakened defense strategies used by cartel lawyers because the recordings provided clarity that written statements could never match. The betrayal represented one of the heaviest in modern cartel history because the twins moved enormous quantities of cocaine while maintaining personal access to leadership, and then they turned around and recorded those same leaders. Their cooperation impacted individuals at the highest levels because it challenged the secrecy that cartel bosses relied on to survive. Loyalists inside Mexico viewed the recordings as unforgivable because the betrayal threatened entire families and organizations tied to the Sinaloa Federation. The twins knew that their actions crossed a point where returning to the trafficking world became impossible, and the recordings marked the beginning of a path that could never be reversed. The twins reached their breaking point in November 2008 when they walked into federal custody and surrendered themselves to DEA agents in Chicago after months of secret communication. They entered the building quietly with no dramatic scenes because they wanted everything handled without drawing attention from cartel lookouts. Their wives and children were evacuated immediately because federal agents understood how fast danger traveled once information reached Mexico. The evacuation happened with urgency because the DEA expected retaliation as soon as cartel leadership realized their most trusted American distributors switched sides. The twins began full cooperation that same day by handing over recordings, routes, contacts, and breakdowns of shipments moving across the Midwest. Rumors started spreading through Mexico within days because missing calls and stalled communication patterns alerted people connected to high-ranking figures in Sinaloa. Word traveled quickly through plazas controlled by groups linked to El Mayo and factions aligned with Arturo Beltran Leyva, and quiet conversations turned into open suspicion. Cartel loyalists started discussing retaliation because betrayal carried consequences in that world, and people wanted answers about what happened to their most productive distributors. The rumors mentioned cooperation, and those whispers carried enough weight to trigger anger among men who viewed loyalty as sacred. The streets in Culiacan and Mazatlan buzzed with talk about lost shipments and missing money, and many believed the twins traded information long before their surrender. Margarito Sr. refused to stay away from Mexico, even after his sons warned him repeatedly that returning would place him in extreme danger. He insisted on making the trip because he believed his age and respect within older circles protected him from retaliation. He felt confident that old relationships built during the mid-80s still held value because he once negotiated deals with men who respected him. The twins begged him not to go because they knew the environment changed completely after the Civil War fractured alliances. They understood that revenge did not spare family members, and they warned him that cartel leaders viewed betrayal as a collective offense that affected entire families. He ignored the warnings because he believed loyalty from his past would outweigh the anger directed at his sons. His disappearance happened shortly after he arrived in Sinaloa because his vehicle was found abandoned in a remote area near Navalado with a threatening message inside. The message referenced his sons and implied consequences for their cooperation, and authorities immediately understood the meaning behind those words. The DEA and Mexican officials both assumed he was killed because no ransom demand followed and no group attempted negotiation afterward. His body was never recovered, which matched patterns seen in cartel reprisals during that period when victims vanished without leaving traces. The disappearance confirmed what the twins feared from the beginning because retaliation against families was common whenever betrayal involved high-ranking leadership. The twins reacted privately because they learned about their father's disappearance while already inside federal custody with limited contact with the outside world. They carried guilt because they understood that cooperating placed their father in danger, and they blamed themselves for not forcing him to stay away. Federal agents observed their reactions closely because the emotional weight affected their mental state during early debriefing sessions. The news crushed them because they hoped cooperation would save their families. Yet the first major consequence took someone they loved deeply. They continued cooperating because backing out would not reverse anything, and they accepted that survival came with painful losses. The disappearance of their father became the darkest moment of their lives, and that loss remained tied permanently to the decision that shaped their future. The recordings collected by the twins set off a federal chain reaction that investigators later described as a domino effect because more than 50 indictments emerged from the information they delivered. Federal agencies including the DEA, FBI, IRS, Homeland Security, and multiple district attorney offices worked together because the case stretched across several states. Multi-agency task forces mapped routes, tracked couriers, froze bank accounts, and identified patterns that linked Chicago operations to Sinaloa's senior leadership. Lieutenants connected to El Mayo and several men tied to Arturo Beltran Leyva faced charges based on cross-referenced evidence from wiretaps, financial records, and the twins' testimony. Those indictments hit regions like Illinois, California, Wisconsin, Indiana, and Texas, and the scale shocked authorities who did not realize how deeply the Sinaloa network operated inside the United States. El Chapo's case became the centerpiece because the brothers held recordings that prosecutors considered rare and extremely valuable. Their testimony explained how negotiations worked and clarified details about shipments that connected Mexico to multiple American cities. The tapes were used during pre-trial filings to show that El Chapo personally approved key decisions regarding heroin, quality, and pricing. Prosecutors used the audio to demonstrate his leadership position inside the Sinaloa Federation, and those recordings helped strengthen arguments about his authority over violence and logistics. The evidence supported charges involving conspiracy and trafficking, and the brothers' cooperation provided context that investigators lacked before the tape surfaced. Their ability to describe conversations with people like Felipe Cabrera Sarabia and Vicente Zambada added depth to the case and helped prosecutors build stronger narratives for the jury. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere changed when the brothers appeared because Judge Ruben Castillo understood the weight of their decisions. He praised their cooperation as a breakthrough because few traffickers at their level ever provided such detailed insight into the cartel's structure. He acknowledged that the evidence they delivered helped federal agents dismantle crucial parts of a violent organization. He also called the situation a tragedy because their cooperation cost them their father and destroyed their entire family structure. Judge Castillo said their lives represented a mix of extraordinary assistance and devastating consequences. His statements reflected a balance between gratitude for their help and sadness for the damage created by their choices. The twins received 14-year sentences for moving 60 tons across the United States because their cooperation reduced the punishment significantly. Prosecutors argued that their assistance provided unprecedented information that helped dismantle major parts of the Sinaloa operation. Without cooperation, they faced life sentences because the quantity of drugs involved matched federal guidelines for maximum penalties. The charges included conspiracy to distribute cocaine and heroin, money laundering, and participation in a continuing criminal enterprise. Their plea agreements recognized the value of their evidence, and Judge Castillo emphasized that their help saved lives by disrupting violent networks. Life inside prison changed their world because they entered protective custody immediately for security reasons. They lived in separate facilities to prevent coordinated attacks, and their housing units contained inmates who faced similar risks due to cooperation. The rules restricted their movement heavily because the Bureau of Prisons understood how cartel affiliates might attempt retaliation inside the prison system. Their days included limited recreation options, constant monitoring, and strict separation from general population. Pedro struggled with the routines and faced disciplinary issues involving phone violations and unauthorized communication attempts. Margarito adapted more quietly, but both men dealt with isolation that weighed on them daily. Their cooperation caused serious collateral damage within their families because their wives faced charges connected to money laundering and financial transactions tied to the trafficking network. Both women accepted plea deals and served shorter sentences compared to the twins, but carried criminal records afterward. Their older brother Armando became heavily involved because he helped handle large cash movements and communicated with the suppliers during the early years. He was charged with laundering money and received his own sentence, which affected his family significantly. Other relatives faced questioning, surveillance, and legal pressure because federal agents wanted to understand every layer of the operation. Some family members lost homes and assets linked to the drug proceeds, and others faced public attention that changed their lives permanently. The consequences stretched far beyond the courtroom because the twins' cooperation reshaped their identities completely. Their families lived with fear, legal constraints, and long-term emotional effects from the collapse of the empire that once funded their lifestyles. The sentencing period marked the beginning of a new existence shaped by protection, limitations, and constant reminders of the choices that altered their futures. Their families carried the weight of betrayal, danger, and loss, and those burdens remained long after the legal processes ended. Life after their 2020 release felt strange because both brothers entered relocation programs that moved them through multiple states quietly while agents monitored any possible threats. They lived low-profile lives inside neighborhoods where nobody recognized their faces or understood their history. Security fears followed them every day because they knew cartel revenge did not operate on normal timelines. Their routines stayed simple, with limited travel, small apartments, and controlled communication channels that protected them from exposure. They avoided public spaces and kept movements unpredictable because safety depended on staying invisible. Margarito eventually stepped into training roles for law enforcement seminars, where he explained cartel logistics and distribution methods to officers who wanted real insight. He spoke about transportation routes, communication habits, and financial systems used by traffickers because his knowledge came from firsthand experience. His motivation came from wanting to prevent younger people from falling into the world he once controlled. Public appearances created danger because photographs or online clips could expose his new identity to the wrong people. He understood the risk clearly, but he believed sharing information held value for investigators fighting large trafficking networks. Their safety remained uncertain because former DEA officials warned that cartel revenge could stretch across decades without losing intensity. Some agents believed the danger would never fade completely because the recordings harmed powerful figures connected to the Sinaloa Federation. The twins moved carefully because they understood that patience remained a core value inside cartel culture. People connected to violent organizations sometimes waited years before acting, and that reality shaped every decision the twins made after release. Rumors about hidden millions followed the twins because people believed no trafficker moving that much product walked away without keeping something. Speculation continued because their operation generated billions, and many assumed they stashed money before cooperating. The rumor never died because secrecy fueled imagination and blurred reality. Some people claimed their cooperation was pre-negotiated long before their surrender, and online forums repeated theories about secret deals that guaranteed protection. Documents showed that cooperation began shortly before November 2008, and that negotiations followed standard federal protocols. The blurred lines created myths that made their story sound larger than life. Their father's death shaped their legacy because his disappearance remained the darkest part of their journey. The story felt unfinished because no body was recovered and no group claimed responsibility. That loss followed them silently and created a permanent shadow over everything they accomplished or sacrificed. The twins changed global drug enforcement because their cooperation exposed logistical systems that cartel leaders relied on for decades. Their detailed knowledge of transportation routes helped investigators cripple multiple Sinaloa pipelines across the Midwest. Their information reshaped how agencies approached large trafficking networks and dismantled distribution hubs. Their impact reached Chicago, Mexico, and federal policy because agencies learned how to track bulk cash movements and identify smuggling methods with greater accuracy. Their cooperation influenced future cases involving multi-ton shipments and helped shape new strategies for targeting violent organizations. Their story helped authorities understand weaknesses inside groups that once seemed untouchable. Their journey revealed truths about family loyalty, ambition, and the survival instinct that shaped every decision they made. Their fear and bravery created consequences that stretched across years and changed lives permanently. Their story showed that choices inside the drug world carried heavy costs that followed people long after the business ended. Their story closed with silence, loss, and survival, leaving a reminder that every choice carried a cost that never truly disappeared, even after the empire collapsed.